The War for Emancipation, 1863 through 1865. Synopsis. As the country was split in two, there were many ups and downs on each side. Both sides had their similarities and differences, but ultimately proved brutal on both sides. As the U.S. went deeper into the Confederacy, we needed more and more troops to occupy the South and battle. This ultimately led to politicians and high commanding officers to understand the benefit and necessity of enlisting black soldiers. Until the Emancipation Proclamation, few commanders had black troops such as abolitionist Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who had the 1st Black Regiment. President Lincoln declared on January 1st, 1863 that anyone who is able to fight will fight. The language in Lincoln's proclamation implied that he wanted to keep African American troops from the main campaigning white troops. They earned less pay and faced the possibility of murder or being sold into the slave trade if captured by Confederates. James Henry Gooding wrote to Lincoln questioning why they were paid less if they were born here and selflessly joined the army. Majority of these black soldiers had once been enslaved, and their armed presence shocked the Confederacy. To Friends, they represented freedom, but to Southerners, they represented the disruption of their racial and social hierarchy. These African American soldiers shattered the myth that they would be docile and cower away. 15 black soldiers received the Medal of Honor, which is the highest level of honor. On the Confederate side of things, many slaves accompanied their masters as camp servants, cooking and carrying supplies. These slaves were always coerced into being a Confederate slave. These people had contradicting loyalties and were seen as property. On March 1865, the Confederate also allowed the enlistment of black soldiers, however, only a few dozen joined. As 1863 hit, Lee's Virginian army continued moving offensively east. The Battle of Chancellorsville was a Confederate victory, however, it forever wounded Major General Stonewall Jackson. After Jackson's death, Lee kept moving, leading to the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which led to Lee's retreat from Pennsylvania. The Union continued west while this was happening, and Grant began campaigning against Vicksburg. Vicksburg was the last holdout on the west, and seizing this would allow for unhinged travel along the Mississippi for the Union. This ultimately split the Confederacy in two when the Union gained Vicksburg. The Enrollment Act was the first attempt at a draft in the North. However, you could pay $300 to be substituted and not have to serve. The Emancipation Proclamation led to fear that if you were drafted, your job would be stolen from the freed black slaves, which ultimately led to riots. In other places in the North, we showed a wide unity, and sanitary fairs raised millions of dollars for the troops. The Confederate Congress passed the Conscription Act in spring 1862, and military service was required between the ages of 18 to 35. You could be exempt of this if you had 20 or more slaves. Spring 1863 brought food shortages, which led to bread riots where women would protest by leading mobs in the street. Women also served as spies throughout this time. For example, Rose O'Neal Greenhow traveled to high school social cliques throughout D.C. and reported information to her Confederate contact. She was ultimately found out by Allan Pinkerton, where she was placed under house arrest and shipped to Maryland and left for Europe to gain help for Confederates, but ultimately drowned trying to return. Elizabeth Van Hugh sacrificed her social standing for the Union. She was from a very wealthy Virginian family and was scorned for spying on the Confederates. When Grant took her city, she was placed on guard and ultimately helped nurse Union prisoners. Among the social chaos, more elaborate military plans and tactics arose. Grant was promoted to General-in-Chief of the Union and led to the bloodiest battles. Action on both sides caused more casualties and destruction from disease. Over half of war casualties were from this. More soldiers came from rural areas and where there was less immunity and less vaccinations. Tuberculosis, measles, typhoid, and smallpox are some of the diseases. Medicine of the war focused on curing and not preventing. Many soldiers tried home remedies by plants found in woods and fields. The amount of unsanitary things that were conducted also led to disease. Unclean water and food, the not replacement of lost fluids, diarrhea and dysentery, and weak immune systems led to the death of men. However, this led to both armies digging latrines instead of using local waterways. Medical surgery was limited and painful at this point. Invasive surgery for wounds in the throat, head, or chest would ultimately result in death. The more popular wounds in limbs were treatable through amputation. Even though it was still unsanitary, it proved best for survival. Patients were given chloroform and opium to help dull pain or to knock them out. William Hammond, Surgeon General for the U.S., wanted to help regulate doses and manage supplies. His guides only applied to federal armies, so volunteer unit surgeons used their own concoctions or ignored his limits. Women took on key roles in hospitals in the North and South. However, conditions ended up being so bad that many women quit soon after volunteering. Death took men left and right in the war, whether it be from disease or through lightning and bee stings. It left many women widows. The ideal widow wore black, mourned for 2.5 years, and did many other things. Many women tried to be this ideal widow, however, it was unattainable due to that they couldn't afford mourning clothing. It also left many pregnant and nursing widows, as they were all throughout the age of contraception. In 1864, the election took center stage over this war. Lincoln and Johnson were on the National Union Party, and George B. McClellan and Pendleton were Democrats. Each needed 117 electoral votes to win, and Lincoln won easily due to support from Union troops and Republicans. In the popular vote, Lincoln crushed his opponent and won 22 states where McClellan won 3. The last leg of the war was the deadliest, as the Union destroyed the Confederates east and west. William Sherman burnt down Columbia and South Carolina and captured Charleston. Lee surrendered on April 9, 1865. To make sure that the end of slavery was real, the Republicans wrote the 13th Amendment. However, no slavery did not mean no racial injustice. The effect of slavery was still felt long after its end. Connections. I connected this to the Civil Rights Movement and the American Revolution. I connected this to the Civil Rights Movement because they both represent racial injustice in society. I connected this to the American Revolution because it both shows women helping their men by spying and doing their jobs, such as Benedict Arnold and Peggy Arnold. My questions are: which side has a better draft law and why? Who was James Henry Gooding, and what were two common diseases during the war?